Hey guys, welcome to this Source Gaming discussion. I am your host, epicmartin, and today I am joined by the one, the only, the mythical Nantenjex.
Hello everybody, how y'all doing today?
I just want to say thank you, Nan, for joining.
No problem, we had our DLC discussion a few weeks back. This seems like an appropriate follow-up discussion to it now that we have the first of the fighter pass revealed.
Exactly, and the tables are turned, because this time I'm hosting, so it's kind of the antithesis to our past discussion. But as an aside to that, our discussion is a little bit weird today, because we're not going to talk about the content itself. As we all know, Joker was the first revealed DLC fighter for Smash Bros. Ultimate, and we've already gave our thoughts on that in a discussion featuring Nantenjex, as well as Triss and the Smash Prophet himself, Relax. So that discussion will be linked in the description below and at the end card of this video. So I would recommend you watch that first. And second, I'm not really a Persona guy myself, so I'm just going to leave it to the experts to cover that content. But what we're more so focused on right now is how this reveal affects Smash Bros. Philosophy. And what I mean by this is in the community, there's a subset of fan rules and some guidelines thrown by Sakurai himself, I guess. You kind of mix them in, you kind of get Smash philosophy a little bit. And we're going to kind of give our thoughts on how that affects everything. So, Nan, I want to start with you first because your opinions differ from mine, and mine might be a little bit more controversial. So, Nan, why don't you give your thoughts?
Yeah, so Joker was a surprise. I can definitely say I never saw it coming. But for me, I don't think Joker impacts Smash DLC speculation as much as everyone else thinks it does. So, and for different thoughts I've also seen. So originally my DLC predictions from a previous video were I think it was like Cosmos, Waddle Dee, Bandana D, Banjo Steve, and Erdrick from Dragon Quest. And Joker obviously isn't part of that, but I also said those were like sort of, you know, iffy predictions because the game wasn't out when I made them and stuff like that. Now that we've got Joker, I think what I was thinking of for how Nintendo would go about picking the DLC, because remember, Nintendo picked the initial list and then Sakurai picked what he felt would work best from that list. My thoughts around this have changed. Like, originally I had Bandana D, but now that Joker's the first one revealed, I'm starting to lean more in the direction that every character is going to be a guest character, except for maybe one who will be like a brand new character, kind of the same way Corrin was. I'm leaning more in that direction. And I'm also thinking that some things are like some of Nintendo's choices, because many thought, you know, Nintendo would only pick stuff that was really related to them. But with Persona 5, I mean, it's not even on a Nintendo platform. And Joker himself has only had one appearance on Nintendo systems, being Persona Q2, quite literally 3 weeks ago for Japan, and not over here at all. So it's definitely like caused some head scratches. But for me, I don't think it's such a huge, oh my god, everything sort of flipped on its head. Because when you sit down and think about it, it's a kind of a similar situation to Cloud. Shin Megami Tensei and Atlas are big names in the industry. Maybe not on the Final Fantasy level, of course, but they are still a big, massive, recurring series. And of them, Persona is the most popular, and of them, Persona 5 is the most like wide-reaching and the most recent. And Joker also has like one of the more interesting designs of any of the Persona protagonists, who are usually just in school outfits with a sword or whatever. Like, Joker's actually like a thief, so he adds something interesting to it. And I think when you look at all these factors, I can see why Sakurai wanted to pick him. Also, of course, Sakurai's played Persona 5, he knows the character, he enjoyed Persona 5, the UI in Smash Ultimate is kind of inspired by Persona 5's more dynamic UI. And it's also a good sign that Nintendo knows they're not just picking characters that are relevant to them or would be good marketing material for them. Of course, Persona 5, a port may be coming to the Switch. We don't know. It's not been announced. So maybe that will turn out to be the case, and that's why they picked them. But I feel like it's more of a good indication that Nintendo knows what's big in the gaming community as a whole. They know what's been big recently in the last few years, even if it's not on their own platform. they know what is popular and what fans will like, and that's what they're focusing on. And that's why Joker, who did get fan requests, he wasn't like a completely out of the blue character. He's still a protagonist of his own game. He's still fairly relevant. He still had quite a lot of fan requests and stuff, and the reception to that has been mostly positive, I've seen. A few naysayers here and there from people who aren't that familiar with the series, or people who just really wanted Nintendo-only characters. And overall, I feel like all this reveal has really done for speculation is opened up people's minds a bit more to what Nintendo's own reasoning for picking stuff is. It's not just characters who like have a big impact on Nintendo, which I mean, at the same time, that's what I was thinking initially when I started this. I mean, I had Erdrick. I mean, he was on Nintendo, obviously, but Dragon Quest as a whole, so the whole gaming spectrum is huge. And I also had Cosmos on my list, who was kind of there, even though she's only appeared on Nintendo platforms in Xenoblade 2 as a cameo and Project Cross Zone. She's also, like, a big part of the Xeno series. And I felt like that would be, for people fans of that series, she's quite a big icon, even if she didn't originate from the Xenoblade specific part of it. And that's why they'd lean more on her. So I was already thinking Nintendo had a bigger awareness of this thing and was using it to pick their own speculation. I don't think that's different from what we already knew. It's all more like Joker just confirmed this but put more emphasis on that factor of it. So for me, it didn't change like drastically, it didn't flip the table, but it did allow for now I feel like characters like Doomguy have a bigger chance of being picked as DLC. Because, yeah.
Okay, I understand your position a little bit. I can see why, because this is more so geared towards the faith in Nintendo's DLC choices, more so than what it actually means to be in Super Smash Brothers. Like, I kind of get what you mean. Like, people didn't really trust Nintendo, and after Joker was revealed, people have a little bit more faith in their product. So that's where I'm getting from what you're saying.
Yeah, I mean,
I think,
that was definitely a factor in what I was saying. But I think my main point was that Smash DLC, they're going to pick characters who are big fan favorites, and they're going to pick characters who are big to gaming, and potentially also pick characters who are both relevant. I think there's going to be a mix of relevant and legacy characters. Like, I still feel like Banjo has a good chance, even though he's not that relevant. So I think there's going to be a mix, but that's my point. I think people were so focused on that Nintendo would pick just Nintendo focused ones, which Persona isn't. Persona, apart from the Q spin-off series, Persona has never been on Nintendo platforms. The fighting game wasn't, the rhythm game wasn't, the main series wasn't. It's always been Shin Megami Tensei for Nintendo.
Yeah, earlier in your statement, you said that, Persona isn't up to the level of Final Fantasy. It's certainly not, but it's still in Smash Brothers, correct?
Yes, yeah.
That line is actually kind of the crux of my whole opinion on this reveal. And it was a really good segue, because essentially, if you look at all the past third-party characters that have entered into Smash Brothers, the first one being Solid Snake, then Sonic, and then you've had Mega Man, Pac-Man, etc., Cloud, Ryu. The main pattern, and I'm saving another third-party character off till the end because I have a point about her, hint, but most of them are third-party icons. They have changed the industry in one way or another. Final Fantasy is the quintessential RPG. Street Fighter is the quintessential fighting game. Mario is Mr. Video Game. All of those third-party characters that have impacted one way or another. And I think Joker takes that notion out of the bag and kind of throws it away. I think Joker kind of proves that you don't need to be this iconic industry-changing IP to be in Smash Brothers anymore. And I'm not saying that as a downgrade, honestly. Like, I think that's awesome. It opens the door, but I think this changes the game because a lot more characters could be in. Hell, and this might be a stretch, but I could see this opening the door for maybe some indies or something. You know what I mean? Like, I think this is door opening. And before you say that, okay, Bayonetta might have done that prior, I think that Bayonetta is an exception, not just because she got through the ballot, kind of, but I think because she's kind of a Nintendo character at this point, too, when you think about it. My opinion might be a little bit, like, kind of out there, but I think that Joker, in this sense, opened the door for a lot more, and I think because of that, you don't need to be as iconic anymore.
I see what point you're coming from. So essentially, you're saying that it's a bigger. Basically, the door is open to anyone as long as they fit some of the specific criteria, like, you know, be the protagonist of a series. And
well, not everyone. I mean, what I'm saying is, as long as they had a current recent title, I think I should have added that in. As long as they have a current recent title, and as long as they're in the minds of some gamers, I think they are a candidate for Smash Brothers.
Okay, so you're saying like relevancy is the most important factor,
yes,
essentially,
yes,
over legacy. Right, I see where you're coming from. I don't completely disagree. I do think that there are characters who are fairly relevant that would potentially get in. I mean, some ideas being like Doom Guy, because the new Doom's coming up, and Doom came out in the Switch. Was it last year now? I think it was last year.
It was last year, yeah.
Yeah, and Rabbids as well was last year. I mean, Persona was last year, so they're clearly looking that far back. So yeah, you also had Rabbids, you had Nier Automata was obviously a really big title from last year, and Monster Hunter World wasn't on Nintendo systems, but it blew Monster Hunter series up, and I think that could be a big influence. Resident Evil 2 and Devil May Cry 5 are both big upcoming games, with Resident Evil in particular had Resident Evil 7, which also did really well in 2017. So there's a lot of like big titles that aren't necessarily connected to Nintendo but are highly relevant that they can pick from, and I do see that, but I don't think they're going to go with just anyone. For example, another really big title that kind of blew up despite the series being around for a long time and being much more independent is the Yakuza series. Like, Yakuza 0 came out, and the main character, Kiryu, became really popular, and I know there are a lot of people who want him in Smash, and they started re-releasing all the Yakuza games because it just kind of suddenly, despite existing for years now, I think going as far back as even the PS2, suddenly now they're all really popular because there was one really well-marketed, successful game that made people interested in the series. But despite that, I think that the Yakuza series is still a little too niche of a franchise in the wider spectrum to see any sort of representation in Smash. Because the thing with Persona is, Persona itself, and it's not Final Fantasy level, but it's also not like just a random RPG. The Shin Megami Tensei series has been around since the Super Nintendo, and has always been fairly popular RPG series. Like, it's in the top, I would argue, the Shin Megami Tensei overall series is in, like, the top 5 RPG series out there, including Final Fantasy and Dragon Quest, and even, like, the Mario RPG series. Like, I would say Shin Megami Tensei is quite a fairly well-known one, even if it's not at the top. And Persona is its most popular spin-off series. I mean, they're somewhat treated independently nowadays, but they came from the same source, and Persona 5 is by far the most successful in the series, even though many would argue that it's not actually the best game in the series. But that's where I feel like the relevancy came in. It was really, really popular from an already not mainstream like Final Fantasy and Dragon Quest, but still, it's like it's not Bravely Default. And it's not like Phantasy Star is also big, but I personally feel like Shin Megami Tensei is bigger. Breath of Fire, it's like Shin Megami Tensei is bigger than Breath of Fire, and there are 100 other RPGs from the SNES era and Nintendo 64 era that just kind of faded to existence into the ether, like Ogre Battle, or was that a Tactics RPG? Am I thinking of? I feel like there was like 2 games that had ogres in them. But you get my point. It's not like completely irrelevant, and I still feel like that still reflects kind of what Sakurai has said before in the past when it comes to third-party characters, that they still need to be someone who's well-known and iconic and means something to gaming. And yeah, the impact's not as strong, but that's always going to be the case when you're working down. I mean, if you've already hit the strong contenders, if you've already hit Mr. RPG himself, any third-party RPG character you pick next is gonna be from a lesser series. But that doesn't mean that lesser series is, a bottom-of-the-barrel niche franchise. And
I'll be honest, yes, I do agree with that notion that we have pretty much scraped the barrel of a lot of those third-party characters. You have a lot of those characters that you've already... Basically, Smash has already hit upon a lot of the genres, the major characters of each genre. So I understand that, and it was pretty much inevitable that the bar would be lowered. I'm just saying that I think this lowers the bar just a tad more, I think. And I'm saying that because, I agree with you too that Persona is not just like any other RPG. It stands out from a lot of people because of its mechanics, because of its battle system, because of the story. So, from what I get from it, obviously. Again, I don't play Persona, but that's what I get from it. I just think that because of that, the ramifications of that are stronger than the inclusion itself. So I'm just saying that a lot more choices are available now, and actually, what's the word for it? Liable. A lot of choices are liable now because of that inclusion.
Yeah, I see where you're coming from, but I don't think that's any really different from before, because like I said, a lot of the big legacy characters are already in the game. Like if you wanted to pick Mr. First Person Shooter, okay, you go with either Doom Guy or Master Chief. They're the only real choices. Mr. Racing, you go with the Outrun car? Like, who do you pick for a racing? It doesn't really fit in Smash. And then Mr. Sports, again, it's like, who do you pick? Cristiano Ronaldo? Like, no. Most sports characters are like actual people, unless it's like Mario sports titles, in which case you put in Waluigi, and that's obviously not happening. So, like, I feel like that was naturally going to be, any guest character was going to be a bit below. And while I personally didn't see Joker, I was always up to the idea that they weren't going to stick exclusively to series like Dragon Quest and fan favourites like Doom or Banjo-Kazooie, or like Minecraft, obviously, is another really, really big one. Like, I still think has a chance of getting in. That's why I initially put Cosmos in my predictions, because I felt like they weren't going to stick exclusively to the big shots. They had to be still someone who fans would recognise. There's still someone from a series that is popular. And the Xeno Saga series is still less than the Shin Megami Tensei series. Like, they're not really in the same ballpark. The Xeno Saga series just had that benefit of being connected to Nintendo already via Xenoblade. But I think another good way to look at a Joker is as an Atlas character. Because when you look at like the big Japanese third-party companies, the only ones that are really lacking a character in Smash Brothers are Tecmo Koei, Level 5, and Atlas. They're the 3 big ones. I guess you could make an argument for Psy Games, or whatever they're called, the mobile developer, who are quite big, but they're exclusively mobile. And so they don't really like... That's not to say that they don't have a place in Smash, but they're in a different sort of playing field to the others. And then when you look at Atlas, Tecmo Koei, and Level 5, I mean, if we got Ryu Hayabusa and Professor Layton, I mean, I think both of them are certainly possible DLC candidates. I think they were certainly possible from the beginning, and I'd love Professor Layton. I'm indifferent for Ryu Hayabusa, but if he got in, I wouldn't be mad.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, if the next trailer shows up and it shows Smash Brothers X Smash Brothers, I would be just, like,
What?
Oh.
What? Who would you have?
Sandbag, man. Don't forget our last
Oh yeah,
discussion.
of course you're going full on Sandbag, aren't you?
Bring Sandbag. Smash Brothers X Smash Brothers. It's happening, folks. But no, I see what you mean. I see what you mean. There's yeah, at first glance there doesn't really seem to have been, you know, that much of change, and yeah, I can agree with that, because that limit, that barrier was going to be hit already. You know, I already said that already. Like, that there was going to be some point where they were going to limit themselves if they're going to go with, like, the iconic of the iconic, you know. That's why a lot of people, I think, were pushing Steve, because that's technically one of the most iconic characters left to be in Smash Brothers.
Yeah.
So,
Steve falls into that category. Steve, and people debate back and forth between Doomguy and Master Chief, because first-person shooters are obviously a big thing, but Master Chief's issue is that he's Microsoft's mascot, essentially, and Doomguy's issue is that his games are all super incredibly violent, and you can't translate that over to Smash very well. Although I think that personally that argument got thrown out the window when Isabelle got added in, because she's like a massive pacifist. And she's like the complete opposite of Doomguy, but she wouldn't fight in Smash, but she got in anyway. So if they added Doomguy, I don't think that's going to be like... They're not going to translate all the gore and violence, but that doesn't mean he's not going to be Doomguy or play like Doomguy. But anyway, that's another discussion for another...
that is another discussion. But... yeah, that's pretty much my stance, I think. Just that there is a lot of repercussions, like, when you look out. But when you look in, it does seem normal. So that's my thing.
So essentially, my argument, I guess it boils down to, is that I feel like Shin Megami Tensei and Persona and Atlas are still big enough characters in gaming, and have still had a big enough legacy in gaming, that Joker's inclusion, while not one of my first choices, still makes sense and still follows the pre-existing notions that Sakurai put forward, whereas your idea is more that Joker has opened the floodgates to more, not as big series, but ones that are more highly relevant now, and ones that are being more talked about now by fans, that Nintendo is focusing more on the current day rather than looking at how it's impacted gaming as a whole and their status as an icon.
Exactly. That is my position, and I think it's going to be greatly expanded upon with DLC, because honestly, when you think about it, Joker is the perfect promotional character. I mean, again, Persona 5 is a game that recently came out, so you tie that in with Smash Brothers and you make a lot of money. I mean, that's the whole point of DLC, is to make a lot of money.
I mean, if Persona 5 Crimson does get announced for Switch, and, you know, there could always be an argument that this is actually for Persona Q2 3DS, which just came out in Japan but will be coming out hopefully next year in the West. But, like, maybe with Joker DLC announced, they're going to try and time them up so that they can both enhance each other. But, like, until we have that confirmed, we actually don't know, and it's going to be, if Persona 5 doesn't actually come out to Switch anytime next year, then we can assume that Nintendo picked Joker specifically on the merits of the Persona series and how successful that game was last year in 2017. But if it does come out, people could also make the argument that it was chosen purely for promotional reasons to get Nintendo fans to buy Persona 5 when it came out.
Yeah, no matter how you look at this, people are always going to have a very unique argument, and that's also the case for another of our staff members here at Source Gaming, because we have a third argument that was presented to us by Phantom. He couldn't make it on the discussion, unfortunately, but he gave us kind of a write-up that signals his thoughts.
This was Phantom's words, and I'm going to read it in a very serious tone. So, if we look at the roster of Smash Brothers, we're still seeing the same thing that is still considered to be a fan rule. Every fighter has been on Nintendo hardware, especially the third-party fighters. Bayonetta, although starting on PS3 and Xbox 360, the franchise has now moved exclusively to Nintendo. Cloud is everywhere, an iconic JRPG hero, but still hasn't had his own title specifically on Nintendo hardware, at least until next year. But the Final Fantasy series has still appeared on Nintendo and started with Nintendo, right? So even if it's not the character's initial appearance, his appearance on Nintendo is truly what matters. Thus, the same occurs with Joker. Although the titles hasn't been announced for America, Persona Q2 on 3DS recently released in Japan, thus he's on Nintendo hardware. So does this really mean anything for future DLC announcements? Not really. It may mean even some surprising fighters, but definitely not the likes of Master Chief. However, I think we should look more at Sakurai's statements on having fighters that are not protagonists of their series. This statement seems more interesting than Joker's inclusion. So that's like 2 points included there. The long paragraph and then the very short one at the end. And I think it might be interesting to tackle both of these.
Yeah, so I guess we'll start with the first one, talking about how each of the third-party characters have appeared on Nintendo platforms at one point. And I'll bring up here's one thing I'll bring up. When Cloud was revealed in 2015, Final Fantasy VII obviously wasn't on Nintendo platforms at that point. I mean, it's coming to the Switch now, so that's going to be totally not a thing anymore. He'll be on Nintendo platform. But if you look at the game itself, if you go into Smash Wii U, if you go into Smash 3DS, and you look at every single thing relating to Final Fantasy content, it doesn't just say Final Fantasy. It says Final Fantasy VII. Everything that is related to Cloud in the game, Midgar, the Chocobo costume, and Cloud himself, they say he's from Final Fantasy VII. So I think personally, the fact that they went out of their way to say this is strictly for Final Fantasy VII in the game kind of proves to me that I think that they didn't really care if he was, like marketing towards general Final Fantasy, because it's like, if they're sticking with just 7, a game that's never appeared on a Nintendo console up till that point, then why does it matter for that character to be on a Nintendo console?
So, I see your point, and this is actually going to be for Phantom's point, and this is something that Sakurai himself said in previous interviews. When talking about Cloud, he talked about how they considered Final Fantasy characters from Nintendo games initially, like Cecil and Terra. But the reason they went with Cloud specifically was because he was he's the biggest Final Fantasy character, and Final Fantasy VII is the biggest Final Fantasy game, so it really had to be him, even if Final Fantasy VII wasn't on Nintendo systems. And he even made a joke about the fact that Cloud had appeared in, like, Kingdom Hearts Chain of Memories on the Game Boy Advance, so technically he had been on Nintendo systems. But I'd also like to bring up the fact that Sakurai, to counter his point, that is essentially any DLC character has to have appeared on Nintendo hardware still, and and Joker being on Persona Q2 on 3DS shows that he has been, so he technically does count. My argument to that is that Sakurai has previously stated that being on Nintendo systems is a courtesy, not a requirement. Like, he might maybe he'll prioritize characters and series that are more focused on Nintendo, because that's of course what the audience of Smash Brothers is like. It's much more likely that the fans of Smash are going to be more favourable to characters with a closer connection with the Nintendo. But that doesn't mean it's the overriding rule, and if a character is big enough, despite having little Nintendo relevancy, like Cloud, even though he had a tiny bit, like, if the character is big enough, or the series is big enough, then it doesn't matter. And so, he brings up Master Chief as not a chancer, and while I personally don't think Master Chief will be getting in, that's not because he's owned by Microsoft, that's not because he's not appeared on Nintendo systems. For me, that's because they would prioritize Minecraft Steve, of course, because of Minecraft, but also Banjo because of its connection to Nintendo and just fans in general, over Master Chief. But I wouldn't say Master Chief is absolutely impossible, in the same way that I wouldn't say 2B from Nier isn't impossible, despite the fact that the Nier series has never appeared on Nintendo systems, and 2B has never appeared on Nintendo systems either.
I would partially agree with that. I think that currently, if you were going to kind of as an aside, if you were going to include a Microsoft-esque character, you would have to prioritize Minecraft, because Minecraft has two things. It is relevant and iconic. While Master Chief is iconic, but kind of pseudo not relevant, because like he has the Master Chief collection, he has Halo 5, and a new Halo game is coming, but he's kind of in a lull right now. And a lot of people know who Steve is, I think, more than Master Chief. But I will say this. I do think that Master Chief is Mr. First-person shooter, in my opinion, because he's a lot more prominent than, say, Doom Guy. So I think he would have that same kind of priority alongside Steve. So I think they have equal priority, but just that Steve kind of out edges him a little bit. And then Banjo, I think, again, the only reason why he could get in is because he has a new game, personally. So that's just my opinion. Now going back to Phantom's, Phantom's statement, yeah, your interpretation of it, I could agree with because of what Sakurai has said, and that yes, he did consider other Final Fantasy characters. So yes, he did consider the Nintendo prominence for those characters, but I still don't think that, again, with him choosing Cloud, it's that, prominent.
Well, moving on to Phantom's other statement about how we should look more at the fighters not being protagonists. This is obviously around Piranha Plant. But my thing with this statement is that regarding Piranha Plant, it compared him to characters like Duck Hunt, Rob, and Game & Watch. Characters that aren't on everybody's radar, characters who aren't protagonists, or arguably Game & Watch and Duck Hunt are, but they're not relevant. That's kind of the point. They're niche. They're surprises, and Sakurai likes having one of these in every game. But I think that's the key point to take away there, is that there's always one in every game. And I think had Sakurai had more time to add new characters, Piranha Plant would have been in the base game as that point. And I think it's a clear indication that other DLC won't act like this when Piranha Plant is the one that's being given away for most people who bought the game for free, because he's just this bonus character that you get, and he's the surprise character. But also on top of that, yeah, he's not a protagonist, but he's also a Mario character. And Sakurai did point out in an interview that, everyone knows Piranha Plant. Piranha Plant is probably more well known than the majority of the Smash Brothers cast. Like, let's be real. A lot of people know Piranha Plant is an iconic enemy in Mario, and so that will be what sells him as the DLC. And I don't think you'd get the same impact by having like some third level character from some random series. I'm trying to think of a character who would be have a possible chance of getting in like that. Just to say a random one off the top of my head, I suppose.
A crowd member from Punch-Out!
No, that's too obscure. I was thinking more like you wouldn't get Mumbo Jumbo from Banjo-Kazooie. He'd be unexpected, of course, but you're not going to get him over Banjo. And it's going to be the same for like any other series they add. I think anyone in the Fighters Pass is going to be a protagonist or a key villain in that series, if that series has already got a character in Smash.
As an aside, I think it would be funny if they added Mike Tyson from Punch-Out!, like his actual appearance from Punch-Out!. That would be really funny. But,
that would be a surprise, yeah.
Would be a surprise, yeah, but definitely not happening because, video game rules and stuff. But yeah, no, I agree with that. I think that if you look at the retro characters, they could be iconic in their own way. Game & Watch sold an F-ton of units. Rob is a well-known Choi from the NES era, and then Duck Hunt is literally part of one of the most iconic video games of all time, and then Piranha Plant is part of the iconic franchise of gaming. So even, it's kind of like the situation I described with Excitebike Racer in the last discussion we did. Excitebike Racer is part of an iconic series, and I think that supersedes the relevancy of its series. So I think Piranha Plant's inclusion is justified, but I don't think it's apt to compare it to Joker, because Joker is not filling the role of that weird niche character. He's certainly not going to be holding ducks while you're shooting at him.
No, I don't think that's his point. I think his point is more that, rather than what changes in DLC isn't that Joker didn't come in and change how DLC is being looked at, because he was on Nintendo systems. He's still a character who's related to Nintendo in some way, even how small. Instead, what is going to change up DLC speculation is that Sakurai is going to focus more on obscure characters that aren't the main characters of their own series to surprise people, and that's the part that I disagree with, because I feel like Piranha Plant is the exception, not the rule. It's something that Sakurai likes doing because he likes being Sakurai and being weird sometimes, but at the same time it's not what he's going to prioritize, because he knows that more people will like the protagonist over the third or fourth character down the list.
Right, exactly. I mean, even my statement still kind of applies to that notion, because again, those niche fighters aren't part of that DLC pack. I mean, they're part of the base game more so. Well, kind of. I mean, Piranha Plant, I think, was part of the project plan personally. But, you know, again, those serve a specific purpose, and I think that you can't apply that to DLC logic, because DLC is supposed to be profitable. If you market these niche, unprotagonistic characters to people, they're not really going to want to buy it, because, you know, they're not, first of all, you don't want to do research on a video game character, because some people have lives, but second, you know, you're not going to maximize the profit margin, essentially, in economic terms. You know, you're not going to get out there to that casualistic fan base who's going to be like, holy shit, I know that character, I might buy him, you know? So, Nantenjex, what's your final thoughts on Joker's impact?
I still don't think it's impacted. I mean, it's changed my view on what DLC choices we're going to get, and I'm now leaning more towards just third party, and I've also thinking about characters like Rabbids and Doomguy over other characters, but I still feel like that's not going to like completely dominate DLC. There's still going to be a mix of some relevant characters, some some legacy characters, big fan favorites, and maybe like one promotional character who's like legitimately a big promotional character. I'm still leaning more towards that. Maybe Bandana D and Cosmos won't be getting in. Maybe we won't get both Steve and Banjo, but I feel like Erdrick at the very least is still very likely. So Erdrick will still get it.
And thank you guys for watching. Be sure to follow us on our social media pages, including our Facebook and Twitter accounts. Be sure to also support us on Patreon to receive exclusive perks. And we want to thank our super Patreon, the Duke of Dorks. Everything will be linked in the description below, including our past discussion about DLC and the Persona 5 Joker discussion with Lax. So we hope you guys enjoy this video, and we will see you in the next one.